Welcome, philosophy students, to this module on the philosophy portfolio. Now, if you are sort of an attentive student, you will have noticed that the title of this course is actually Philosophy Major Orientation and e-Portfolio. And you may have wondered, at what point do we talk about the e-Portfolio? What even is an e-Portfolio? Well, those questions will be answered today. First of all, E stands for electronic. So we're going to be talking about electronic portfolio that you will be developing, cultivating, and updating throughout your career as a BYU philosophy major. This unit, this module, as you will have noticed from Learning Suite, is actually a module called Philosophy Beyond BYU. These modules that fall into this category of philosophy beyond BYU are designed to help you communicate to people outside the university what the value of your BYU education as a philosophy major has been. And we talked previously about the importance of developing a resume and a curriculum vitae as ways of communicating to stakeholders some of the skills that you've acquired, the experiences you've acquired, what it is that you're able to do now, and why it is that it would be in the interest of that particular employer or that particular graduate school admissions committee to bring you on board. And the portfolio is another tool that you'll have at your disposal. So the major, as I think you probably will recall, is bookended by two courses. There's this course, Philosophy 200, which introduces you to the major, and then when you complete your studies at BYU, in your last or next to last semester, you'll enroll in a course called Philosophy 490. It too is a 1-credit course, and it is called a capstone course, but a component of that course, in addition to preparing a special paper that's your sort of featured piece of philosophical work, you also produce and submit a electronic portfolio of your best work as a philosophy major. So today I just want to say a little bit more about what exactly is entailed by the philosophy portfolio requirement. So what is a portfolio? A portfolio is simply an assemblage of materials that you gather and that you curate with some particular audience in mind. In the case of our requirement in the program, these are materials that are connected to the education that you've received at BYU. And the audience to whom the portfolio is directed may differ depending on what your objectives are. For some people, you'll develop a portfolio with an eye towards sharing that portfolio with prospective employers or prospective graduate schools or whatever. And what the portfolio will include is a number of artifacts. And by artifacts, I mean things like an updated version of your resume or curriculum vitae, the best work that you've produced as a philosophy major in certain particular areas, and certain elements that are left to your discretion to include that communicate something to your audience about who you are and what you value and what you might be able to offer to those stakeholders. So let's maybe begin today by reviewing the BYU philosophy program outcomes. If you haven't heard that term before, I promise you, you will hear it again, and you'll hear it with some frequency. At BYU, as at other institutions, there's a lot of talk these days about defining learning outcomes for our courses and for our programs. Every course that you take at BYU will have learning outcomes. In other words, things that presumably you'll be able to do by the time you get to your philosophy, the end of your philosophy degree. So let me share with you a few things. Here are program outcomes. Now, these differ from course learning outcomes. These are the skills and competencies that we want you to have acquired by the time that you complete all of your coursework at BYU and you're ready to move on to whatever's next in your life. So what I've opened up is the BYU undergraduate catalog. And you're probably familiar with this page. It lists the program requirements. If you scroll all the way down this page, you'll discover that at the bottom, you can find this section that's called Program Outcomes. And it lists these outcomes in particular: history and value of philosophy. Students will be able to identify major philosophical figures, texts, and movements and understand their historical context, their philosophical interrelations, and their importance. Critical and effective reading, writing, and communicating. Students will be able to read and think critically about philosophical texts, write clear, logically sound, and well-researched essays, and effectively discuss and present philosophical topics. Logic and meta-logic. Students will be able to construct, symbolize, and evaluate proofs in syllogistic logic, truth-functional logic, first-order quantificational logic, set theory, and piano arithmetic, and understand relevant metalogical results. Philosophical and ethical applications. Students will be able to use philosophical knowledge and skills to solve theoretical, practical, and ethical problems, and to integrate philosophical principles with religious and moral convictions. And finally, career preparation. Students will be prepared for further education and employment using their philosophical skills and knowledge. Now, these are the things that we as a department have decided that it's important that every student be able to demonstrate by the time they complete their studies in philosophy. And so what your portfolio will do is effectively give you the chance to provide evidence that you've in fact met these not course learning outcomes, but rather the program outcomes. And what you will do is you will gather and then include in that portfolio artifacts that will demonstrate that in fact you have met the program outcome for instance, history and value of philosophy, or logic and metalogic, philosophical and ethical applications, and so on. Specifically what we'll ask you to do, and when I speak of artifacts, I mean generally papers that you write for these classes. I say artifacts instead of papers because in some cases you may opt to include an exam or some other sort of item or object that you've prepared for a class that demonstrates your competency and your having fulfilled a particular program outcome. But what your portfolio will include then is the following: some artifact, presumably a paper, that deals with some item in the history of philosophy, looking at a philosophical problem in its historical context, looking at a philosophical figure who is of some historical significance and interpreting their work, and so on. Since the way the curriculum is designed requires you to take courses in the history of philosophy, what you will do when you prepare your portfolio is simply take what you regard as the best work you have produced in that particular area. Maybe you took an Aristotle class and wrote a paper with which you're pretty satisfied. That paper would count as the artifact in your portfolio that demonstrates you have met this program outcome. Here is evidence that you have some facility in dealing with historical issues in the history of philosophy. The other thing that I'll ask you to include is a logic and or metalogic artifact that demonstrates that you have acquired certain skills in formal logic. It could be a paper, it could be an exam, there may be other options available to you. You'll choose something and include that in your portfolio. As far as the ethical applications program outcome, you'll be required to take courses in the philosophy of value. Maybe it's an intro to ethics course, maybe it's a history of ethics course or something else. You will want to take some work that you have done that has an ethical bent to it and include that in your portfolio as well. Now, these other items that I haven't mentioned, the critical and effective reading, writing, and communicating, and career preparation, I won't require you to produce an artifact for each of these program outcomes simply because they don't lend themselves to that sort of assignment. Presumably, every piece of writing that you do demonstrates your skills in writing and effective reading and communicating and so forth. So there's no need to upload an artifact to demonstrate that you've met that program outcome. Whether you've met it or not will be apparent from the other artifacts that you're including. And the career preparation element of the philosophy program outcomes is simply the successful completion of courses like Philosophy 200 and Philosophy 490, where, as you've seen with the other assignments, you're cultivating these skills and putting together artifacts such as a CV or resume to demonstrate that, in fact, you're preparing yourself for some particular career path. So anyway, that is what we mean when we talk about a portfolio. It's a gathering of materials that you generate during the course of your studies in philosophy. So I'm going to make this point, and I hope that you underscore it and recall at this point clearly every single semester. You will be producing work this semester, next semester, and up until the time you graduate. As you take philosophy courses, you'll be generating short papers, longer papers, term papers, exams, and so on. Here's my advice to you. Save absolutely everything. File it away. If a professor doesn't give a term paper back to you, pester them and ask them to return it to you, and then file it away. Keep all this stuff. And when you get to the point where you're close to graduation, you're enrolled in Philosophy 490, and you will be formally finalizing your portfolio, you'll have this sort of repository of materials you can go back to and say, okay, what am I going to do for my ethics artifact? Oh yeah, here's my paper from Philosophy 213. I was proud of it. I did well on it. I think that it speaks well of my competencies in dealing with ethical questions. And then you've got it. And the same thing with work, exams that you take in Philosophy 205, 305, 405. Just keep everything. And then when you get to the end of your career and it's time to complete your portfolio, you can simply select materials that you've already generated. One of the nice things about Philosophy 490 is you don't generate a lot of new content. You don't write a brand new paper from scratch. You're simply sort of refurbishing good work that you've already produced. So from here on out, save everything. It's not hard to do. Storage is not expensive these days, electronic storage. Save everything in some kind of format, presumably electronic format, back it up, save it in multiple places. And when you get to the point where you want to finalize your portfolio, it'll be really straightforward and easy to do. Now, it's an online portfolio. It's not a physical artifact that you'll be generating, and a notebook, for instance, of materials that you'll submit when you graduate. It's rather an electronic portfolio or element, or I'm losing my sanity here, an electronic gathering, assemblage of materials that you'll be easily disseminating to people who may take an interest in it. And so what exactly do you need to do? What format should your electronic portfolio take? Now, there are lots of providers out there that can provide you with a platform for gathering this content and presenting it to potential employers or graduate school admissions committees. You certainly have the latitude to choose the platform that you most prefer. I'll provide you with a couple of links on Learning Suite to potential platforms that you may want to consider. Basically, what you'll be doing is developing kind of a personalized web page. And here are a couple of providers. There are a lot of options. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you again and show you a couple of options that you may wish to consider. One platform that a lot of philosophy students have found is very easy to work with is called Weebly.com. They have, I think, free and paid subscription models. If you want to, you could go to Weebly.com, play around a little bit with the materials that they have. You don't need to have any kinds of programming skills whatsoever to put together sort of an online web page that will suffice or count as your portfolio. Another option that you may consider that some students have used is Wix.com. You can do the same thing on Wix, create a page, a network of pages to which you will upload some of these documents that you'll be gathering. So there are a couple of alternatives that you can consider. And to be honest, you can customize these tools in any way that you best see fit, hopefully in such a way that it sort of helps you make your case, again, to prospective employers or to graduate school admissions committees, that you're an attractive candidate that they want to consider. I've noticed as I've directed students who are putting together their portfolios, they tend to take very different approaches. Let me show you one portfolio, completed portfolio, that one of our recent philosophy graduates assembled. Salmon graduated, I think, last year. And last I heard, he was going to work for the government in some kind of security position. And what he wanted to do was create a portfolio that communicates in a really memorable and effective way who he is, what he values, what he's done, what he's accomplished, what he hopes to do. And typically an online portfolio will include sort of a biographical component of some sort. It may, but needn't include a picture of you. It should include some kind of brief biographical blurb that can give someone an immediate sense of who you are and what you value and what you're striving to accomplish. And then as you sort of scroll down or scroll through this page, you'll find that there are a number of artifacts that the student has uploaded. Here's the capstone paper. I click on it and it immediately opens up as a PDF. The work of which Salmon was most proud. It was the paper that he found most personally satisfying and which he decided to polish and revisit as his capstone paper. So he includes that. He includes a little bit more of biographical information, his experience as a volunteer, his career objectives, and he provides some information about his personal interests. You don't need to do all that, but it's certainly an option that you may wish to consider if you think about the portfolio as not simply an assignment that you need to satisfy simply to take care of a course requirement at BYU, but if you actually think about it as a tool that could perhaps open up some doors for you down the road. And so on this particular, in this particular portfolio, we have some of the artifacts that he was required to produce. Artifacts that demonstrate that he's met the program learning outcomes for philosophy, and then other things as well. For instance, I mentioned earlier the ethics artifact. Here is the paper that the student wrote for Philosophy 300, which that semester had a focus on ethics. So anyone who is interested in seeing what kinds of skill set the student has acquired can spend a little bit of time leafing through the pages on their electronic portfolio and get a sense of what it is, who this student is, what they've accomplished, what their skill set looks like, who they are as a person for that matter as well. Now you'll also include things like your CV or your resume, and along with, I'm telling you this now, but you probably don't need to worry about it until you take 490, along with your specific artifacts that you upload to your portfolio, you'll also include brief descriptions, like a one-paragraph précis or summary or overview of that particular artifact that explains its significance in terms that a non-specialist can understand. So that's what the portfolio will consist in. At this stage of your career, you don't need to populate your portfolio with all of these items. Presumably, at least in most cases, you're just now beginning your career as a philosophy student. You've got a lot of classes left to take. But one thing I'm encouraging you to do is to gather and archive, save materials that you generate for your classes, so that by the time you get to the end of your career and you're putting your portfolio together, I realize I'm repeating myself, but I'm hoping that this underscores the significance of the counsel I'm offering you. You've got a bunch of materials that you can polish and drop into your portfolio, and suddenly you've got a really nice gathering of materials that showcases who you are. So what you'll be required to do at this stage of your study, and for this course in particular, is simply to select a platform, create a template, and send me a link to it just so I can see that you've gotten started. You don't need to do really much of anything at this point. If you want to spend some time playing around with it, uploading a picture, maybe coming up with a biographical blurb, fantastic. If you want to do more than that, more power to you. It's not required. But at the very least, I want you in this module to spend a little bit of time looking at different platforms that might host your electronic portfolio. And all you need to do is send me a link to them so that I can see that you've begun to at least get the ball rolling. That will be your only requirement for this week. You'll find links to a couple of the platforms that I've already alluded to, Weebly and Wix. There are many, many others. If you're more comfortable with something else, go ahead and gather your materials in a platform hosted by some other company. That's certainly fine. One thing I'll mention as well, I don't want anyone to feel like their privacy is being violated by sort of putting themselves out there in a very public, maybe a too public way. One of the things that you'll be able to do in 490 is control the privacy settings of your portfolio. If for some reason you decide, I know I have to complete this requirement, I'm not thrilled about it, I don't ever want to use it, that's perfectly permissible. You can adjust your privacy settings so that maybe you and I are the only ones that can view it, or the instructor of 490 and you are the only ones that can view it. That's certainly fine. You have the right to determine how much of this portfolio you want to be publicly available. There will be more opportunities to talk about the portfolio down the road. If you have questions, if I've said things that are unclear, if you're looking for suggestions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, the assignment for this week is pretty straightforward. Spend a little bit of time looking at platforms that you may find appealing, stake out some territory, send me a link to whatever you have, whatever you've decided upon, and that will suffice. I'll provide you with links to those platforms on Learning Suite. I'll also provide you with links to a couple of sample student portfolios in case you're looking for some inspiration or ideas about what you might do with your portfolio. You can spend some time looking at these and seeing what works and maybe what doesn't work. Anyway, this is sort of the essence of this week's module. As always, if you have questions, let me know, and we'll see you again.